So, to be sure we generate the right kind of motivation, so let's take a moment, as usual, some breathing meditation and then the usual visualization. And visualize in the space in front of you the enlightened mind of a Buddha, manifesting in the form of Buddha Shakyamuni. Wearing the saffron robes of the monk, while being inseparable from your Lama and Lamas. At the same time, you're so surrounded by all sentient beings. Especially those who you've got a hard time with right in front of you. And remember that they're just like us. Their mind just wanting to be free from any unpleasant experiences. About striving for satisfaction. All of them deserving to be happy and satisfied. Despite of their faults and limitations. So in that way generate affectionate love. It recognizes the potential of sentient beings, finding them endearing and worth for our love. And then let's pay extra attention to all the unbearable suffering sentient beings experience. With even their worldly happiness being so limited. your samsaric mind and body. You're so vulnerable, so fragile. And let's generate great compassion. An affectionate mind that wishes for all sentient beings to be free from the three types of suffering. Suffering of suffering, suffering of change, and pervasive conditioned suffering. And their wishes to contribute to help sentient beings overcome their suffering existence. And that aspiration then turns into the altruistic attitude. That is completely determined, driven by this intense inner strength and courage. To not waste our precious human existence. But instead, dedicate it to the welfare of each and every sentient being. Recognizing that right now we can't even benefit ourselves. Let alone all sentient beings. Let's aspire to attain the state of a Buddha. Actualizing our fullest potential. Not just for our own benefit, but for the benefit of every single sentient being. So with this motivation, let's recite the prayer. Sangye Chodam Soke Chodamba Chanjo Padu Dani Gyapsuchi Dagi Jinso Kipe Sonamki Jola Penche Sangye Jopashu Sangye Chodam Soke Chodamba Chanjo Padu Dani Gyapsuchi Dagi Jinso Kipe Sonamki Jola Penche Sangye Jopashu Sangye Chodam Soki Chonamba Janju Padu Dani Gyapsuchi Dagi Jinso Kipe Sonamki Jola Penche Sangye Jopashu. Alright, let's continue with the topic, the true truth. But before I start, I have a question. Has anyone ever heard of mathematical Platonism? Mathematical Platonism? What are numbers? Numbers, mathematical formulas, mathematical theories. There's a whole discipline called, well, mathematical philosophy, basically, the philosophy of mathematics. Now, what do you think? There are three possibilities that mathematical philosophers describe as to the existence of numbers. There are three possibilities. Now, I'll explain them to you and see whether it sounds familiar with regard to what you've learned so far about Buddhism. There's mathematical Platonism, mathematical nominalism, and fictionalism. Platonism is the idea that numbers exist as an abstract outside of time and space, and that we can utilize them. We can utilize them, of course, to count things and so forth. That is Platonism. That talks about universals, like according to Plato, there's a universal bed, there's a universal table, and so forth. So in the same way, you have these universal numbers. And then there's the idea of nominalism, saying basically, well, there are numbers because, well, in the same way as we teach a child mathematics, well, if there's 7 cakes, you have 7, right? So 7 multiplied by 6, you have a 6-fold bulk of 7 cakes. And so in that way, you've got 42. Does that make sense? So it's based on the objects that then we count them, right? Based on certain objects, we count them. And based on that, we say they're numbers, but they don't exist outside of time and space. And then there's the third idea that numbers don't exist at all, fictionalism, that we can utilize them, but they actually don't exist. That they're just made up. They were just made up and they don't actually exist. Does this idea, these 3 ideas, do they sound familiar? Okay, Platonism. What does Platonism in this case refer to? Inherent existence. As if there were these numbers somewhere in the universe existing on some other plane, but we can utilize them, right? Fictionalism. What does that refer to? What does that sound like? Fictionalism. Which view does it reflect in Buddhism? What do you think? And then nominalism, which view does that reflect? Platonism, yeah, all clear what Platonism refers to. Now, what about the other ones?
Absolutism.
That's kind of Platonism. Platonism is like the absolutism. There are absolute numbers, right, that they exist in an absolute way. And then 2 left with nominalism and fictionalism. Which one is nihilism? Fictionalism. That is nihilism. Nothing exists, we just make it up kind of idea. And what is nominalism? The middle way. Isn't that interesting? There's a very interesting, I referred to it a few days ago, maybe yesterday. There's a short video, a YouTube video. It's 12 years old. I looked it up today. And it's the title is Do Numbers Exist? Do Numbers Exist? And then it says, I think, what is it called? Math Philo or something. But if you just Google, do math exist? And put the word exist in capitals. You have a young mathematician, well, young 12 years ago, I don't know now. But anyway, so he gives that same explanation. And he himself opts for nominalism. And I thought it was so interesting how in Western philosophy, these ideas do exist. But as you probably know, philosophy is kind of looked down upon a little bit. Philosophy is like for the sake of just discussing things that doesn't really mean anything. It has no impact on our life. It doesn't seem to have a specific goal. It's just to figure out how things exist. Whereas in Buddhist philosophy, there's a goal. there's a very important purpose behind philosophy, which is where the difference lies. But you find many of these ideas in Western philosophies. However, Platonism, it talks about universals. But actually, in Buddhism, do universals exist or not? What do you think? Is there like a universal table? Do they talk about a universal table or a universal house or a universal person? Do they?
No.
Oh, so that's the question. For those of you who study philosophy, even if they don't use the same term, but does the idea of a universal exist? Yes. Okay. Could you explain? Could you elaborate on that? In what way?
Is that conventional way exists?
Very good. What Perry says, exactly. There are conventional universals. We can talk about table. Usually the English term that they use is generality. Generality, so the generality of a table, of this table is table. But when we talk about universals, we're not saying there's an absolute table existing somewhere beyond time and space. As in mathematics, when you talk about Platonism, some numbers that exist on a different plane that we just utilize. No, that doesn't. That's like an absolute table, and that wouldn't be accepted. But a conventional, we can talk about table in general as a conventional idea, right? Okay. Anyway, I thought to talk about this because numbers are also important. We do usually analyze objects such as tables, the eye, the body, but more abstract things have to also be taken into consideration. Like, how do numbers exist? The ideas of even abstract numbers such as pi. But pi is only possible if there's a circle, and there are plenty of circles around. Of course, perfect circles are probably more of it. Well, even in nature it's possible that you have perfect circles. And definitely we can draw perfect circles, especially nowadays with the necessary gadgets. And based on that, we label pi, right? On the basis of the diameter, the ratio between the diameter and the circumference of the circle. So that's how you get pi. And what's interesting about numbers there are great similarities in terms of endless, in both directions. Right? Minus as well as plus. You can count endlessly. So we kind of accepted endless numbers, but we existed since beginningless time and continue to exist, can be slightly uncomfortable initially. But with the numbers, we're totally fine. Pi can go endlessly. So endlessness is a limitlessness. Is actually not new to us. But somehow numbers seem to be so abstract that they don't really relate to our life, although everything is based on numbers. I mean, especially modern technology. Without mathematics, we wouldn't have all these technical gadgets. So mathematics is a very interesting idea that is also just labeled. Merely labeled. But that doesn't mean that 2 and 2 is not 4. So merely labeled doesn't mean one day it's 5 and today it's 2, right? And then the next day it's 4. There's still a structure to it. And that is so difficult to comprehend, that on one hand it's merely labeled, but that doesn't mean we make things up. That would be another extreme. All right. Another extreme as opposed to being inherently existent. So these are all aspects we need to consider, we need to put into consideration in order to understand what is meant with the true truth. That was just something I wanted to introduce to you. And maybe this person, I don't know his name, it doesn't give the mathematician's name, But he does a great job explaining those three ideas, and you find other videos that explain this further. And you may just help them to deepen our understanding. The words are different, slightly different. Nominalism, okay, so that's fictionalism, okay, that gives away. Platonism is a slightly new term. But yeah, it means like some kind of absolutism. Great. Okay, so where did we get to yesterday? I did start to talk about the true truth, conventional ultimate truth. As you all know, the word truth is used in a slightly different way, as opposed to the way we usually use the word. It doesn't refer to ideas and opinions, but to the things themselves. We have an idea of what the instances or the examples of the true truth are, and also a bit of a sense, how do we distinguish between the two? Well, based on the particular minds, the particular consciousnesses that are mainly responsible for perceiving them. In particular, when it comes to the ultimate mind, so how do we arrive at an ultimate truth? Well, basically through an ultimate analysis. We analyze a particular phenomenon, we search for its inherent existence. We're not merely satisfied with a conventional existence or an appearance to our mind, but we go further, as in searching whether that aspect that appears mixed with the object, its inherent existence, whether that can be found. And so in the end, we end up with the non-findability of that self or a table or a number for that matter. The number 7, you can look for the essential number 7, but you don't find it. If you've got 7 cakes, where's the number 7? In none of the cakes, right? So with the number, we can do the same thing, and we should. Since numbers have become so important in the modern world, so much part of our everyday life, we're so good at it. If I ask you, 10 and 10 is how much? You won't have to think much, right? It's pretty easy. And you notice with Tibetans, like especially some of my classmates who didn't receive a modern education, that their world was very different in terms of, this natural sense of numbers and time, quite different. Their lives were not that much determined by numbers. So especially at this time and age, I think when we think about the true truth, we should take mathematics into consideration as well, to get a completer sense, a more complete sense of what we're actually talking about here, how even that is merely labeled. And it's actually a little harder with mathematics versus letters, because letters are so different. There's so many different ways of expressing letters in the different languages. The mathematics are universal. The symbol is different, but in the end, the numbers 1 to 10 and to 100 and so forth, they're all the same in every language. All right. Anyway, so having said this, conventional truth are those truths that we perceive with an ordinary mind. Let's put it that way. So when we say a conventional mind, it's basically a mind that on the worldly level, we would identify as a mind that knows its object, that knows table, that knows I, that knows, things around us, situations. So really the ordinary minds in general. Whereas an ultimate truth is determined by a specific mind that searches for something it cannot find. And that non-findability is the ultimate truth. All right. But how do we come to know this? How do we come to understand this? Now, I'm going through this quickly. There's not much time to go into detail because we've got to cover quite a bit. But many of you have already fundamental knowledge of these things. Plus, talking about it briefly, it's better than not mentioning it at all. So when we speak about, in particular, so knowing conventional truth, just Not knowing that something is a conventional truth. I'm not talking about that. But knowing things that are conventional truth. Knowing table, knowing I, knowing you, that is pretty simple. No need to talk about that. It will come up again, but in general, it's what we already know. Basically, we know certain things around us. We just don't know that the way they appear to us, they don't exist. But we're not saying that tables and cars don't exist, of course. So our ordinary minds, they know these objects. But now when it comes to the ultimate truth, how do we understand emptiness? How do we understand this negation, which is really just a negation, nothing more, called in English a non-affirming negation, which is, as I said before, when you search for inherent existence, the non-findability, basically coming to the conclusion, cannot be found. Or just the state of mind of not there, right? I mean, I don't even want to use words, because the moment I use words, it seems to be affirmative. So now to just talk about it, to talk about it with you, I need to use words. But actually, it's just to give you a worldly example. You remember I talked about the ghost or the person in the cabinet, in the closet. So you look and look and look, and there's like just an absence. So you can know this absence, just no absence. So similarly here, your mind can know absence. It's not there, cannot be found. So that non-findability. Initially, the first time, you get some sense of that. It wouldn't even be a mind that incontrovertibly knows this absence, which is another word for emptiness. So the absence of inherent existence, or emptiness, another word for ultimate truth. So you know the non-findability, the emptiness, the ultimate truth. So first there's a correct assumption, and then the first mind that realizes it is described as an inferential cognizer. It's an inferential cognizer. It's an inferential mind. Oops. If it's difficult with the microphone, I don't mind to hold. So maybe that's less complicated.
I think it's a battery.
I think it's a lamp.
I think it's a battery. The other one.
Okay.
She a new one there. Another headset there.
To replace the asset.
Can you hear me? So the first time you know that non-findability, the mind is called an inferential cognizer. Cognizer, just remember, whenever you hear the word cognizer referring to a mind, it knows its object. That's the English word that is used for any kind of mind that incontrovertibly knows its object. But then any other word that is used, such as direct cognizer or inferential cognizer, gives you an idea of whether it's a conceptual mind, whether it arises independence on reasoning or not. So that's what the word inferential cognizer implies. It depends on reasoning. The classic example of an inferential worldly cognizer, anyone know? Because do you know the usual example that has nothing to do with emptiness, but an everyday kind of mind that independence on correct reasons can know an object that is not obvious to that mind, but independence on reasoning it knows. Any example?
Smoke.
Everyone knows smoke. So right, you don't really have mountains or like a mountain pass in Singapore, so that's usually the Tibetan example. Neighbor, your neighbor's house. So a certain type of smoke, I'm not talking about steam, vapor, or no, it's a particular quality of smoke that comes from a fire. If that billows out of your neighbor's window, we don't need to see the fire to know what's going on. So on the basis of your neighbor's window, there's fire, therefore there's smoke, therefore there's fire. Right? So you can formulate it like regarding the subject, my neighbor's window, or my neighbor's apartment, there's fire because there's smoke. And we use this all the time. We infer so much, sometimes wrongly, right? This guy is grumpy because he's got a grumpy face. This guy is in a bad mood because he's got a grumpy face, right? Doesn't mean, oh, this person really likes me because they smile at me. Ooh. So we use this structure. A is B because it's C. We use this a lot, but whether correctly or incorrectly, that is to be seen. But we're used to it. We're used to this, actually. We use it without having to spell it out, basically. And as I said, I mean, even the Greeks knew about it. The Greeks knew about it. It's called a syllogism. It's formulated not in the A is B because it's C. It's formulated in a slightly different way. Does anyone know the typical Greek syllogism? I'll give you one hint. Socrates. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. So what is their syllogism? Socrates is mortal because he's a man. It's just formulated in a different way. So the Greeks didn't put it in that format, A is B because it's C, but it's the same structure you find in Tibetan logic. Exactly the same. Therefore, if you studied philosophy, Western philosophy, which is basically, usually it's Greek philosophy, and then of course those philosophers later on following from the Greek philosophers. But I believe actually, just as our language has a lot of words that their origin is found in an Indo language, Indo kind of pre-Sanskrit language, I believe the philosophy, the Greek philosophy, since it came later, is based on Indian philosophy. There are a lot of words in English that are the same in Sanskrit, which is very beautiful. Cow. In Sanskrit, it's gao. There are other words for it, gao. And it means to go everywhere. What's the English word, to go? To go everywhere, gao, go. And there's so many more words. Anyway, without needing to go into that, but it's helpful for us to understand that even the philosophy we study has its origin in India, in Indian philosophy. So there's a lot of historical research on that, and I've read a paper on this one person concluding that it actually had its origin in India, the syllogism, the logic, everything. Anyway, the point being, A is B because it's C. I'm very familiar with that. Likewise, we can understand emptiness for the first time by applying logic. Regarding myself, it doesn't exist inherently, since it's not inherently one with its, let's put it that, it doesn't exist inherently because it's not inherently one with its parts and not inherently different from its parts, right? Yeah, so that's a classic example where based on you did this meditation. Someone please remind me that I give you your homework. I wanted to put a piece of paper, homework. I gave it to you yesterday on the 3 types of dependent arising, but I mustn't forget to give you one today. Okay. So if I forget, please remind me. All right. So the next one. Here in the case of your meditation, I've basically given you a kind of logical syllogism. The self, yourself, or your inherent self, doesn't exist. Because if it were to exist, it would be either one with your aggregates or different, but neither is the case. So on that basis, you can come to understand that the self, the way it appears to you, can't exist. And when you understand that for the first time, conceptually, yes, but you understand it for the first time, that mind is called an inferential cognizer because it uses inference. It infers based on a reason that the self, the way it appears to you, does not exist. Yeah? So unknowingly, if you've done the meditation, you've actually applied logic in the form of a syllogism. So this mind is initially an inferential cognizer. And thus, as it says on page 24, in the last paragraph, a conceptual consciousness. Alright, so for the first time we can actually know emptiness. It may just be a short moment because we're not focused enough to remain with the same object. But there could be that moment of, it's not there. Right? Okay. But through continued meditative practice, this particular mind, so the object remains the same, but the quality of the mind, that changes. The mind now becomes more powerful. This inferential cognizer that for a few seconds knows emptiness will by no means really affect our self-centeredness because it's so pervasive. Our self-centeredness is so powerful. As I said before, it has been with us since beginningless time, and even when it lies dormant, it informs our actions. In most cases, it influences everything we do, which shows it's a very, very powerful mind. It exists on a coarse level, but even on a what we would call in English like a subconscious level, it's still active. Okay. So, therefore, through continuous meditative practice, this inferential cognizer that can be easily distracted, it eventually gives way to what is called a meditative equipoise that directly, which is another way of saying non-conceptually, realizes the emptiness or ultimate truth of, and here it's the house. Okay, we started off with the house. I talked about in the previous paragraph, you analyze the house as a one with its parts, is it different from its parts, and eventually come to understand it cannot be found, inferential understanding, and now through meditative practice, you come to a direct realization of the emptiness of the house. Now I fast forward in a very, I fast forward. Basically, of course, there's some steps in between. But these steps make total sense. So let me briefly just fill it in here. I didn't put it in, or did I put it here? No, I don't think I did. I didn't. So this is just a short version. But it actually makes sense if our initial mind that realizes emptiness conceptually or inferentially is very distracted. The first thing we need to develop is concentration. Since our self-centeredness is very focused. Have you ever noticed when there's attachment, we are single-pointed? Right? I want something. I am so single-pointedly. You talk to me and I just kind of, I go hazily, I'm thinking of this cake that I really want. And someone else is just buying the last pieces. So whatever you're telling me, I'm focused on that piece of cake over there. Right? And it can be anything else. We're single-pointed. Remember the rocket scientist who sat into a car to remove her rival, put on some diapers, single-pointed. She drove all through the USA to get rid of that. Was single-pointed attachment. Now we do have our attachment is so forceful it can actually keep us on the object. But unfortunately our wisdom is not that single-pointed. Why? Because attachment is stronger. Attachment is the great rival when it comes to single-pointed meditation. Our mind is always drawn, of course, based on the most fundamental attachment, which is to self and my happiness, and then whichever can bring us that happiness. Always focused on that. And there's no attachment to meditation. I mean, it's very hard to develop attachment to meditation, right? That's the first kind of attachment we develop when we get better, basically. Okay, so we need single point of concentration to then be able to remain with the object for an extended period of time. Because 2 seconds, no way. 5 minutes, no way. My self-centeredness is present so many more minutes every day. And even if it's not present, it influences my actions. So concentration is very important. And once you have concentration, calm abiding, that function of the mind is initially not able to analyze emptiness, to take emptiness as an object, where when you understand emptiness, there's a subtle analysis that still takes place. And to now combine the analytical aspect of our mind with single-pointed focus, calm abiding, takes some practice, alternating between focusing on emptiness and analyzing emptiness, and alternating very quickly. Very repeatedly, until you can do it quicker and quicker, and eventually one mind is able to remain single-pointedly focused while subtly analyzing. You know the analogy that is used? The pond and the fish. So your mind, now with the calm abiding, becomes like a very still pond. No scattered coarse thoughts going from here to there. There's only a very subtle movement of the mind, analyzing emptiness, not in a usual sense of analyzing the way we ordinarily analyze, jumping from one object to the next. But there's a very slight analytical function taking place, which is like a still pond and a tiny fish that gently moves through the water, not in any way disturbing the stillness of the pond. You can all visualize that, right? Think of like this cute little goldfish, slowly. So that's what our mind will be like. You can still apply analysis, but your mind is totally still, no disruption, so that you attain what is called a union of calm abiding and special insight. So your one type of mind has both functions. It's very calm and focused, with stability and clarity, and at the same time, it knows emptiness, it knows the non-findability of a particular object, such as a house or the eye. But this mind is limited in that it's not a direct experience yet. It can only take a single object, the emptiness of either the self or the house and what have you. So it's very limited. But once you have this union of calm abiding and special insight, you can then continue with this meditation for a long period of time, again and again, familiarize yourself with that mind, and eventually it will transform into a direct experiencing mind. This is a little hard to believe, because the only direct experiencing mind, or the only direct perceivers, directly cognizing minds we have right now are sense cognizer, right? Sense consciousnesses. Our sense consciousnesses, as long as they know their objects, as long as they incontrovertibly know their objects, they are direct experiences. But our mental consciousnesses, they're all conceptual, they're all thoughts. They're all conceptual. Because in order to transform a mental consciousness into a direct perceiver, Lama Tsongkhapa says there are some dream consciousnesses that can be direct perceivers, direct cognizing minds, but we don't control them. We don't control, some lucid dreaming, okay, but these are not the types of minds that we need to, these are not the types of minds that we need to develop in order to realize emptiness with a meditative equipoise. So theoretically, if you take an ordinary awake mind that is awake, and if you were to focus on candy, just focus on candy, on something absurd like a piece of candy, you could develop a meditative equipoise focusing on candy. You could theoretically do it. You could generate calm abiding first, right? Focusing on candy. I'm just taking an absurd object. Focus on that, calm abiding, special insight, right? And then through continuous familiarity with that mind, more and more, become more and more familiar with that conceptual mind, it could actually transform into a direct perceiver, into a meditative equipoise. But why would you do that for candy? What would be the point? Be a waste of time. Why would you care about that? For emptiness, it's totally worth it. Because the mind that directly experiences emptiness is the only mind that can totally eliminate ignorance, and therefore directly eliminate ignorance and indirectly all the other afflictions. That's the only mind that can do that. Which is why initially realizing emptiness is not enough. You have to realize it directly. And even that is not enough to become liberated. It's almost like, I sometimes compare the mind that realizes emptiness directly with a vacuum cleaner. A vacuum cleaner. It sounds absurd, but we're all familiar with a vacuum cleaner, right? You probably all have vacuum cleaners at home. So it's a bit like when you have a vacuum cleaner that initially, I don't know whether you have these vacuum cleaners, you can regulate the volume. You can kind of make them stronger. So initially, if there's just kind of dirt that you can easily suck up, you put not the volume, but the strength, you lower the strength. You don't need much electricity. But then when you have these kind of long hair carpets, in order to suck them out, they're much deeper in the fabric. It's not like this external, just on the surface kind of dust, but that goes deeper inside the fabric. You need stronger, more powerful vacuum cleaners. So the direct realization of emptiness is similar. In the beginning, when you realize emptiness directly for the first time, you can eliminate the kind of ignorance that you've acquired in this very life. Intellectually, philosophically, culturally determined kind of wrong views when it comes to inherent existence. So these you can now, with this mind, you can suck them up, you can eliminate them. So it's a bit like a vacuum cleaner on the lowest level. Yeah? And then you need to strengthen. You need to put up the intensity of your meditative equipoise, realizing emptiness, to start to eliminate innate types of ignorance, right? That are deeper in your mind, if you like. They've become more part of your mind, so that it's harder to remove them. And what is it that strengthens that meditative equipoise of your bodhisattva? What strengthens your meditative equipoise? Bodhicitta. Yes, bodhicitta. Your determination to become enlightened. Bodhicitta is really the striving towards enlightenment. The wish to become enlightened, of course, based on great love and compassion, but nevertheless to wish to become enlightened. That aspiration strengthens your meditative equipoise to go deeper. It's like the power that puts up the intensity of the vacuum cleaner. Bodhicitta is a bit like that. It powers the meditative equipoise. All right, you understand that. So it's just there's no confused faces I see. Okay, great. Anyway, having said all this, so the meditative equipoise that directly realizes the emptiness of all phenomena is a non-dual awareness. It's also very important. It's totally absorbed into its object because neither inherent existence nor any conventional truth appear to it, which is not the case for a conceptual mind. There's still the general image of what emptiness means to you, the meaning generality. That is a conventional truth that still appears to you. Okay. Anyway, So, because neither inherent existence nor conventional truth appears to it, and also there's no sense that the mind and its object, emptiness, are distant and different from each other. Ordinarily, we have that sense. We have a sense when we know something, here's my mind, and that is its object. It's hard to put into words, but if someone were to ask us later on, like, how was that experience of seeing this object? So if you go back in your, when you remember, there's always a sense, there's the observer and there's the observed. This disappears when you have a direct absorption into emptiness. There's no sense, here's the observer and there's the observed. It's just the observation. Okay. So that is therefore a very powerful mind. A non-dual mind. There's no sense that mind and its object are distant and different from each other. The reason is that the object and the mind seem indistinguishable, like water poured into water. Does that make sense? Water being, like if you pour water into water, that's the mind, that's the object, it all disappears. And so there's a little drawing of this guy going through these stages. This doesn't necessarily happen in one meditative session, but it was too difficult to write down meditative. It doesn't happen in one session. This is a gradual progress, but just as an overview, as a bit of, to get a bit of a sense of how it happens. First, you have the mind that engages in the ultimate analysis of the house. So, is the inherently existent house one with its parts? Is it different from its parts? So you visualize all the parts. Here you have an image of them. Then eventually the mind is convinced of the emptiness of the house. It can't be found, the non-findability. Which then leads to conceptually realizing the emptiness of the house. So basically, since the inherently existent house is not findable, the house must be empty of inherent existence. So that's not really describing the reason, but at least that's really the conclusion you come to. Well, it can't be found, so lack of inherent existence, and then the mind non-conceptually realizes the emptiness of the house, which is just lack of inherent existence. And not just of the house, of all phenomena. When you realize emptiness directly, and that is important, I'm sure you know this, but just to remind you, when you know the lack of inherent existence of the house, you know the lack of inherent existence of everything. Because there's only just emptiness appearing. Right? And it's not like, oh, the emptiness of the house, the emptiness of this, that's not appearing, because that would be an affirming. I mean, you would take to mind the house, but you don't, nothing conventional appears to the mind. So there's just that appearance of ultimate truth and nothing else. Right? We just said to be like knowing the emptiness of all phenomena. Does that make sense? Okay, great. And this is supported, of course, by the Buddha. It's always important to also know where, or have some scriptural support for that. So Kashyapa, the Buddha says in the Sutra of the Kashyapa chapter, Kashyapa, it is as follows. If, for example, two trees are rubbed against each other by the wind, a fire is ignited that burns both trees. In the same way, Kashyapa, when the correct analytical awareness is developed, the power of an Arya wisdom arises. With the arising of this wisdom, the correct analytical awareness itself is consumed. What could that mean? Talk about burning trees and fire igniting. It's highly symbolic, but what could that mean? What do you think? Two trees are rubbed against each other by the wind. A fire is ignited that burns both trees. So that which... So a fire is ignited. What ignites the fire? The trees themselves, right? With the help of the wind, the two trees rub against each other. And then what happens? The two trees are burned themselves. Right? The two trees are burned themselves. So similarly here, in the beginning, you have the analytical awareness. That helps you to understand, of course, emptiness. You realize emptiness directly. And at the very end, you remove the analytical awareness, that conceptual mind, that is overcome. When you're Buddha, you no longer have conceptual mind. So it's almost like it's destroyed itself. It caused its own destruction. Do you understand what I mean? Because initially the first step was that conceptual mind, which then became the cause of direct perceiver, which then caused all conceptual minds to be overcome. Once you're Buddha, you don't need any conceptual mind. So that conceptual mind caused its own future destruction. In that sense. So this is what's saying. So two trees are rubbed together here. Okay, you need the wind, you need other things as well. So the conceptual mind is like the tree, the rubbing against another tree, or being two trees rubbed together, causing a fire, which is the direct realization, which then destroys the trees that ignited the fire. Okay. But we had this analysis before in a different context, using this analogy, but in a different context, where you use a particular type of mind, and then that mind is used in such a way that that mind is destroyed almost by itself. I don't know whether, I think I talked about it here. Well, think of self-centeredness. In the very beginning, or maybe I didn't say this here, I may have said that in a different class, but self-centeredness, the type of self-centeredness that we discussed earlier, well, we utilize this mind, for instance, when we start learning about the Dharma. We start learning about the Dharma. We use self-centeredness. We use self-centeredness. In what way? We use it to understand the Dharma. What do you think? In what way do you use the self-centered mind to start practicing the Dharma? In what way? Our self-centered tendencies, we use those in order to practice the Dharma. Any example that comes to mind?
To relieve our suffering.
Relieve our suffering. What about karma? How do we utilize the self-centered mind to act according to the law of karma?
You only want to get good karma.
Yeah, I don't want to suffer. So I'm not going to harm you guys because it comes back to me. I don't really care about anyone but me. But, I don't want to suffer, so I won't harm you. It's not because I have unconditional altruistic love for all of you. Sorry. Not there. Let's be realistic. Let's start where we are. Right? So initially, what motivates us really to practice the Dharma? I mean, we're told precious human rebirth, focusing on our opportunity, focusing on ourselves. We start off focusing on ourselves. It's not all sentient beings. We may do the motivation, but it's like, just, going through the motion, but it's not really coming from our heart. So we start off with precious human rebirth. Recognize your incredible opportunity and recognize it won't last very long. Death. And then karma. Everything comes back to us, right? Taking refuge, basically for our own benefit. We have to start where we are. And then slowly our mind develops further. And at some point, whatever is my karmic result, I don't care. It's the right thing to do, to work for your benefit. It's like a slow progression from conditional love meaning at least the karmic. I no longer expect you to thank me, but at least I want the good karma. That I want. Until it becomes unconditional love. Good karma or not, I couldn't care less. Even if it meant I go into the most horrific hells for the benefit of all sentient beings, I'd do it. I'm ready to do it. Right? That's the kind of determination. But I can't start off with that. If I try to start off with that, I end up suppressing my self-centeredness, and I have a problem. It becomes like a faulty pressure cooker. You can all imagine what a faulty pressure cooker, it becomes a bomb, right? Yeah. So likewise, if I suppress my self-centeredness, it'll come through stronger. Just as anger and so forth. I need to be very skillful. I need to work with my self-centeredness. Okay, right now it is strong. I need to recognize it.
Don't suppress it, but work with it. What do I want? Happiness. How am I going to act therefore? I don't want to harm you because it's going to come back to me. But that initial mind becomes the cause for me to eventually overcome this mind. Right? It's like the spear of the self-centered mind pierces itself. So you have these ideas in different forms. Here it describes the conceptual mind that leads to a direct perception, which eventually, when you become a Buddha, there's no longer any conceptual mind. You leave that behind because of your direct realization of emptiness. You're able to leave it all behind. Okay. Anyway, so this is this quote from the Buddha. While ultimate valid cognizers are necessarily mental consciousnesses, so anyway, the direct realization of emptiness is the best ultimate valid cognizer. There's the inferential cognizer, there's the union of calm abiding and special insight, realizing emptiness, and there's the direct perceiver. These are all ultimate valid cognizers. So these are always mental consciousness. A conventional valid cognizer includes both sense and mental consciousness. Does that make sense? All right, so sense, of course, the sense objects, but there are also mental consciousnesses that know their objects, but they're not sense. They cannot know their objects because we can know things, we can know our own mind, but not with the sense consciousness. Okay. Any sense consciousness that incontrovertibly knows its main object, a sense object such as shape, color, sound, and the like, is a conventional valid cognizer. Right? Any sense consciousness is a conventional valid cognizer. Also, mental consciousnesses that realize, that incontrovertibly know their main objects, but do not arise in dependence on examining how a phenomenon actually exists, are conventional cognizers. Does that make sense? So, as long as you don't go into the direction of like, how does something really exist? So in general, we can say, then maybe you can debate it a little further, but just to get a general understanding, as long as you're just satisfied with the appearances, you don't analyze further, that's a mind that knows its object is a conventional mind. Just accept without analyzing, without engaging in ultimate analysis. Therefore, conventional valid cognizers do not arise in dependence on ultimate analysis, but operate within the context of not questioning the appearance of inherent existence. Make sense? Right? Without questioning that appearance, it operates on a different level, without questioning how things appear to us. However, that does not mean that conventional cognizers do not arise in dependence on analysis. They may arise in dependence on conventional analysis that investigates anything other than the deepest and ultimate reality of something that appears. An example is a mental consciousness realizing that the shape of the earth is round, in dependence on an analysis of the difference of the sun's angle at different locations, the different time zones, the varying star constellations, and so forth. So there are two ways to understand our Earth is round. Two ways. One is you get into a space rocket. Get in touch with Elon Musk. Hope you get a flight on one of his private rockets and see for yourself. Right? Sit at the window, see Earth, planet Earth, kind of roundish, round, okay, let's say round. You can see it for yourself. But if you don't do that, and that's probably the only way to really see it directly, well, there's logic. What helps you? The sun's angle at different locations, the different time zones, the various star constellations, and so forth. There are different types, there are different cues, different reasonings on the basis of which you can inferentially come to know that planet Earth is round. So when we say we know that the Earth is round, the word know can be used very loosely. Because if I were to ask you, who's seen it directly? No. Who's done who could be bothered to do the reasoning? Anyone? Sounds like differing time zones, etc.? No? But we say loosely, and it's enough. I'm okay. I don't need to realize it, that it's round. I have a rough sense. I'm convinced it is round, and that's enough. Yeah, it's not going to harm me not to. So there's very little we actually need to incontrovertibly know. But unfortunately, since inherent existence, the grasping at inherent existence, is responsible for all our trouble, knowing the lack of inherent existence is a must. Is a must. That's the bad news, because it's difficult. But the good news is it's not the most difficult thing to know. The subtle working of karma is much harder. It's much harder to understand. And to become enlightened, you don't need to know it in all its details. That's the good news. So it's also good and the bad news. All right. Okay. So anyway, this is important to understand. So there's also conventional analysis. What is a mooncake made of? You can analyze that and come to understand how it's made. Okay, that would be a conventional analysis leading to a conventional valid cognizer knowing how to make a mooncake. Yeah? Okay. Now, let's look at the terminology. Conventional truth. What a weird word. Again, we don't use this in everyday language. You won't find it in a dictionary. Maybe in some specific ones you may, but actually conventional truth is not a term we're familiar with. So it's based on, of course, the Sanskrit, and it's based on the English. And it's good to know, it's really helpful to get a better sense, why do we call it truth? Conventional truth. When in actuality it's not a truth. I think I mentioned this before, right? Someone commented on it like, truth? It's not actually a truth. And that's important to understand. The Sanskrit term for conventional truth is samvritti satya. Okay, now it's not embarrassing that I can't pronounce it because there's no Indian in the class. In India, there's often like an Indian in the class. Oh yeah, you are. But do you know Sanskrit? No, okay, never mind. You know, Hindi, then you get my pronunciation. Okay, you get it when I say it wrongly. Usually there's like, an Indian who says, no, it's some British, like when I say Buddha, it's like Buddha. My Buddha sounds very weird, right?
Buddha also means fat.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
But the old.
Old, okay. All right. Okay. Anyway, but yeah, so here there's less of an embarrassment than in India when people go, All right, so samvritti satya, and the Tibetan term is kunsopdemba. Okay. There are various translations, English translations of samvritti satya or kunsopdemba. And everything will be explained. But here, it's not always important that you know the Sanskrit or Tibetan term. You don't even always need to know this. This is one context where it's really helpful to know where the word comes from. So the different translations for conventional truth. Here I just mentioned the one that I'm most familiar with. Conventional truth. Some say relative truth. Some say nominal truth. Nominalism, nominal truth. There's terminology. I've even heard the word superficial truth. Superficial truth. And the fifth one, is the one that we may find most interesting in this concept. Truth for a concealer. That sounds like a cream. Concealer, right? Aren't there these kind of creams, like a concealer cream? You can't see, I don't know, pimples and stuff. Okay, so, but this is one word that some translators have used, but I prefer the translation, truth for that which obscures. So there's something that obscures our mind. Something that obscures our mind. That's the meaning actually in Sanskrit or in Tibetan. Now, more specifically, the literal meaning of samvritti satya or kunsopdemba is truth for concealer or truth for that which obscures. That's really the meaning, the literal meaning. in general, the Sanskrit term, the first syllable of the Sanskrit term, of the first word of the Sanskrit term, and the first word, which is kunsup, is one word, of the Tibetan, so samvriti and kunsup, they have several meanings in general, of course, not surprising. But in the context of the phrase conventional truth, or samvriti satya or kunsup demba, the words samvriti and kunsup mean concealer, or that which obscures. Okay, right, there's a quotation mark on one hand before the concealer, and then a single quotation mark afterwards. That's another typo. Anyway, so concealer, or that which obscures. That's what samvriti means, or kunsup. So conventional, we use the English word conventional. That is not a literal translation. The literal translation of the Sanskrit or the Tibetan is actually a truth for that which obscures. A truth for that which obscures. All right. And satya or demba means truth. There you have it. Satya or demba means truth, and kunsup or samvriti means that which obscures. In fact, kunsup means literally that which obscures everything. That which obscures everything, but I didn't want to make it too complicated. So kunsup, it's okay to translate it as that which obscures. All right. So what is it that obscures? Ignorance. Ignorance. Our mind, our misconception, that obscures. What does it mainly obscure? The ignorance that perceives inherent existence. What does it directly obscure? The lack, the lack, reality, the ultimate truth, the lack of inherent existence. Of course. Why? Because it's diametrically opposed. Diametrically, it's direct. When something doesn't exist inherently and the mind perceives it to exist inherently, that's the direct opposite. It couldn't be any more directly opposed. So our root misconception, you see, when we say ignorance, His Holiness the Dalai Lama oftentimes says, ignorance, there are different types. There is ignorance that just doesn't know. That's not so bad. That's not so bad. Just not knowing the alphabet, or not knowing, inherent or non-inherent, having no clue. Versus ignorance that perceives the opposite of lack of inherent existence. That's a problem. Yeah? So we're up against a type of mind that is very powerful because it's diametrically opposed to what's there. If we didn't hold on to inherent existence, we just didn't know, it wouldn't be as bad. It wouldn't be as powerful. We don't perceive lack of inherent existence, we don't perceive inherent existence, neither. But our mind, our wisdom, our ignorance perceives the self to exist in a way that's the opposite of how it exists, inherently existent. Which is why there's self-centeredness. There's this strong sense that there's something truly here. Something that is truly different from you, inherently different from you, making it inherently more important than all of you, giving rise to that exaggerated obsession with my happiness. If we didn't have that, I don't think we could have self-centeredness and all the other afflictions. So that mind is an obscurer. It's a concealer. It conceals, it obscures, it hides the truth to us. In two ways. It obscures the truth from us. That's why it's so difficult for us to realize emptiness. For two reasons. One reason is, when it is present in our continuum, when you perceive yourself actively, it's not always active, but at times we perceive the self to exist inherently. There's a strong sense, there's a mind that strongly perceives myself to exist inherently. At that time, when you perceive yourself to exist inherently, no way can you know the opposite. Similarly, if you perceive, for instance, the rainbow to be tangible, concrete, located in a certain place. If you have that mind actively in your mental continuum, you can't know the opposite of that the rainbow doesn't exist that way. That wouldn't appear, that wouldn't arise in one mind. Or knowing, or perceiving, for instance, this table to be permanent, and at the same time knowing that it's impermanent. It won't happen. It's one of the two. So, therefore, our root ignorance obscures how phenomena really exist when it's active, when it actively perceives inherent existence. But when it's not actively there, it still obscures. Why? Why? Now this is a question directed at you. Why, when the ignorance is not present, when it's not active, in other words, when there's no mind in our continuum that actively perceives, apprehends, or grasps at inherent existence of something, when that mind is not actively there, even when it lies dormant, it obscures our understanding of emptiness. How? Should I repeat the question? Okay. So, when there's no ignorance present in our mind, it lies dormant. When it's not there. So we don't actively, there's no mind in our continuum. There are other minds, but there's no ignorance actively grasping at the inherent existence of phenomena. What happens? What happens when it's not active? How come that it still obscures? In what way does it still obscure our understanding of lack of inherent existence? How does it still suggest, in quotation marks, how does it still give us the impression things exist inherently? Now, I've really hinted in the right direction. What do you think? Imprints. Okay, we're moving in that direction. But what do the imprints do? What are the imprints of that mind? So it still affects us. In what way? What? I cannot lip read. Habits. Habits. I thought you said something. Okay, habits. But what is the habit? Spell it out.
Habitual, repeat the things in the past. From the past, you have this idea, and then you it's in the memory.
It's in the memory. Okay. Yes, we're getting there. But more specifically, what happens with every mind that perceives a table? If I
We see things as real.
perceive things as real, well, perceive versus, there's a specific term I'm looking for. Appear. Everything still appears to exist inherently. So you were right with what you're saying, but I was looking for that term. So even though our ignorance is not present, but because of its imprints, as you said correctly, or as part of like the residue, as you said, there's still the appearance. Everything appears to exist inherently. Everything. Nothing appears to exist. There's not a single mind to which the object appears to exist non-inherently. That's why it's so difficult. When we hear about, for the first time, we have nothing to compare to. What are they talking about? Right? When you talk about non-inherent existence for the first time, people's faces are like, what? Because no clue what I'm talking about. I give you an example. I used this example in the past, and it's only a rough example, a rough analogy, but I think it kind of conveys a little bit what I'm saying. The fact, or in particular the fact that we're not even aware that phenomena appear to exist inherently. We're not aware of that because we have nothing to compare it to. I give you an analogy. Let's say you were raised in Singapore, okay, and I was raised in India. Let's say I was grown up in a place in India, and there's some places in India where they produce leather, and it's a terrible smell. because of the skin, etc. So in these tanneries, I think they're called, there are like areas where streets full, like a lot of streets where everyone produces leather or well, not produces leather, but works with, like, their tanneries. They preserve the leather so you can use it for shoes and so forth. And there's a disgusting smell in those areas. And if I was born there, and let's say I'm poor, I'm so poor, I've never had the opportunity to go anywhere else, do you think I notice the smell? No, I've got nothing to compare to. That's the only smell I know. So basically I smell it, but I'm not aware of it. I have no comparison. And you come there from Singapore. Do you notice it? Of course. You've got something to compare to. The non-smelling streets and the So I am like someone who's always had the appearance of inherent existence. I have nothing to compare to. You're telling me it doesn't exist that way, and I'm like, yeah, but it appears that way. I experience it like that all the time. That's why it's so difficult. For someone who had an experience, it's relatively easy. Oh, it's like that. When I understood it, oh, now I know. That's why it's so hard in the beginning. Because every single mind has the appearance of inherent existence. That's why the root ignorance, not only when it's present, then anyway, there's no way another mind can arise that perceives the opposite of inherent existence. But it's not always present. However, because of the imprints it has left in our continuum, these imprints are responsible for everything appearing to any other mind, however sophisticated the mind, however good it is at knowing its object. Nonetheless, it still appears to exist inherently. So even when you reflect on emptiness for the first time, even when you conceptually know emptiness, the emptiness appears to exist inherently. The emptiness, when you know, even if you know emptiness, the lack of inherent existence of yourself, your emptiness appears to exist inherently. So you can't escape it in the beginning. You can't, right? That's why it's so hard to take that first step. Emptiness is so difficult. In the beginning, that's the hardest bit. And once you realize on the basis of one object, then it becomes easier. The appearance is still there. Once you've understood it on the basis of a self, or you still need to go through the other objects, reflect on them, spend some time, but it's nothing in comparison. So, having said all this, going back to the root misperception, it obscures in those two ways. When it's active, and even when it lies dormant. So it's truly an obscurer, something that obscures. We can put all the blame on that mind. Okay. So at least we have only one enemy when it comes down to it. Right?
Yes.
That's the most obscuring enemy. Right. Okay. So, concealer refers to the root ignorance that conceals the actual nature or ultimate truth of phenomena. This root misconception is an affliction, a mental affliction, that prevents sentient beings, that prevents us from realizing how phenomena actually exist. Although phenomena do not exist inherently or in and of themselves, the root ignorance superimposes inherent existence on them, thus concealing or obscuring the ultimate nature. For example, the ignorance that perceives our body as inherently existent conceals how our body really exists. Even though our body is not a truth, it is a truth from the perspective of the ignorance that perceives our body as inherently existent. Okay, here I better take a break in terms of just giving you an explanation, because I don't want to confront you with too many concepts. So when we say our body, now when we say truth, what does truth mean in the Buddhist context? That's important. What is the meaning of truth? What is the meaning of truth? This is not an easy question. If you had to define the meaning of truth, but I'm just throwing it out there. Don't be alarmed if you can't answer it because it's not easy. But maybe, if you start thinking about it yourself, just the fact you make an effort to think about it, what could be the meaning of truth in Buddhism? How would you define that? What could be the meaning?
It's the final.
Huh?
Tally with the reality.
Relative.
No, tally with the reality.
Oh, it tallies with the reality. Okay, it tallies with the reality. That's good. Okay, but I give you a slight hint. It's always seen from the point of view of the mind. It tallies with reality. It aligns with, it tallies with reality. Yes, I agree. But if you apply it to the mind, in particular, everything in Buddhism is usually taken to the mind. It's defined, not in all cases, but in this case, it is definitely defined based on consciousness. What could it be?
Something that the mind cannot further broken it down.
That the mind cannot further break down. No.
Isn't it always a cognition?
Pardon?
It's always cognized. It's a thing that that's cognition.
That is cognized. Well, it can be cognized, but a conventional truth is not a truth and it still can be cognized. So a conventional truth is not a truth, but it can be cognized. It can be broken down. So a conventional, for instance, this table is a truth only from the perspective of ignorance, but it's not a truth. Only an ultimate truth is a truth. What is the difference? What is the difference? And I gave you this hint from the point of view of a mind. Yes?
Perspective of superior.
Pardon?
Superior, higher being.
From a perspective of an higher being, yeah, that's not incorrect, but that's not how they define it. So it's true from a perspective of an Arya being, but the Four Noble Truths, actually the Four Noble Truths are truth, but those are usually, why do we call the Four Noble Truths truth? Because they're in accordance with reality from an Arya school point of view. But that's only true for the Four Noble Truths. And of the Four Noble Truths, 3 are conventional truth, and only 1 is an ultimate truth. Sorry, I don't want to confuse you too much. But, since
it cannot be denied or it cannot be denied or negated.
It cannot be denied or negated. But that's true also for a table. It can't be denied and it can't be negated. But that's not a truth. Right? I give you one more hint. Appear. Appear. Consciousness or mind, appear. These 2 words need to be part of that explanation. Mind and appear.
That which appears in an Arya's meditative equipoise.
Although that is correct, but that's not how they define it. Although whatever is a truth appears in, yes, it's correct in that way, but that's not how it's defined.
Does it the object and subject as one?
No, not subject and object as one, no. It's just great that I make you think because you won't forget the answer later on. If I just throw it in the room and then it's easily forgotten.
When the object does not just appear to the mental consciousness, it is what it is. When the object does not just appear to the mental consciousness, the object it's like the mind cognizes the object as what it is.
It cognizes the object as what it is.
It's not just appearing to be.
It's not just appearing, but I mean the mind that perceives the table knows the table as the table is. It's actually in here, but you won't recognize it. A truth is that when it appears to a direct perceiver, it appears the way it exists. It appears. He said that, but not in those words.
I told you.
Oh, you told him? Okay. Well, if you told him, then that's correct. So, yes, the thing is, if, you see, this is what is meant with a truth here in the Buddhist context. If, when it appears to a mind, it appears the way it exists.
Direct concept.
Direct mind. Yeah, direct mind. Direct mind. So let's take the example. An eye consciousness perceiving this table. Does the table appear to the eye consciousness the way it exists?
Sorry.
Does the table appear to my eye consciousness the way it exists?
No.
Why not? How does it appear?
Exists inherently.
There you go. Does emptiness appear to the direct perceiver, the meditative equipoise, the way it exists? Yes. Because emptiness, when it's directly perceived, does not appear to exist inherently. It appears to lack inherent existence. Because all emptinesses appear to it, even the emptiness of emptiness. So even emptiness itself appears to lack inherent existence. So only our direct perception of emptiness, only the mind that directly realizes emptiness, is a non-mistaken mind. To all the other minds, inherent existence appears. Right? Therefore, you could say, it's correct to say that only an ultimate truth is a truth. Because when it's directly perceived by a mind, it always appears the way it exists, as lacking inherent existence. Whereas a conventional truth, whenever it is perceived, of course not by a Buddha, by us as ordinary beings, whenever it is perceived, there's always that mistaken appearance. Always. That's just how our mind works. We don't make conventional truth responsible for that. We're not saying, bad table, whenever it appears, it deceives us. It's just how our mind works. It's how our mind works. It's just in the nature of our mind. When we take to mind a conventional truth, there's always the appearance of inherent existence. The only object that doesn't deceive us is the ultimate truth. When that appears to a direct mind, it always appears in a way that is in accordance with reality. So what you said, it tallies with reality. You can add that. That's true. And what you said was also correct. And of course what you said. So you all mentioned aspects of it. And if you said what I said, then of course you gave the correct answer. But or whoever of you said it, or did you say it?
Oh, okay. No.
It doesn't matter, whatever, it doesn't matter. But you all looked in the right direction. But more specifically, a truth is therefore that which appears as it exists to its direct mind that perceives it. Okay, now let's take a conventional truth. So it's a truth from the perspective of ignorance. From the perspective, so if you could ask ignorance, does the table exist the way you take it as its object? It would say, yes, because to me this table exists inherently, and I believe it is inherently existent. So if from the perspective of this ignorance that perceives this table to exist, that holds on to the table as existing inherently, from its perspective, the way it appears to the table, it exists. Which is why we say it's a truth from the perspective of ignorance, but not a truth in general. Right? That's why we say it's a truth for concealer, a truth from the perspective of ignorance. Does that make sense? Okay, so here, let's look at it. Even though our body, so taking body or table, whatever object, now I've chosen the example of our body. Even though our body is not a truth, because when it perceives through a direct perceiver, it doesn't exist the way it appears as an inherently existent phenomenon. It is a truth from the perspective of the ignorance that perceives our body as inherently existent. So there are times when you perceive your body as existing inherently, right? Because from the perspective of that mind, our body exists as it appears to it, as inherently existent. So from the perspective of that mind, the way it appears as inherently existent, you could ask the ignorance, it would say, yes, it exists the way it appears to me, as inherently existent. Therefore, our body is a truth for the root ignorance. For that mind, it's a truth. It is a truth for that which obscures the actual nature of our body. So it's merely a it's just called a truth. It's not really a truth. But for our ignorance, it is. So you see the difference between the two. Just because of how our mind works, anything but emptiness, when it's directly perceived, always appears to exist inherently. Therefore, it's called a conventional truth. Yeah. Okay, how many pages do I have to cover today? Pages 25. Oh, so 28. Okay. 28, 27. Okay. All right. So, Chandrakirti says exactly this in his entering the middle way. Because confusion conceals the true nature. Confusion here is another word for ignorance. Because ignorance or confusion conceals the true nature, it is a concealer. That which is contrived by it and appears to be true is spoken of by the Buddha as truth for concealer. So conventional truth. Fabricated entities are merely conventional. So here the word fabricated by ignorance as perceiving inherently. Those are merely conventional. Hunso. However, our body and all other conventional truth are not truth because they do not exist in the way they appear to our direct perceivers. So they're truth for our ignorance, but not truth in general. Therefore, the meaning of the word truth in the context of the true truth means that something exists in the way it appears to a sentient being's direct perceiver. Right? Okay, so ultimate truth means actual truth. Conventional truth means truth for that which obscures. So here conventional means ignorance. In this context, conventional means ignorance. Unlike the root ignorance, a direct perceiver is a correct consciousness because it perceives its main object correctly. It correctly perceives a body to be a body, a table to be a table, and so on. But it is mistaken. This is a little bit confusing. Huh? It's correct and it's mistaken? How could that be? So here, you just need to remember the way the terminology is used. So we say it's a correct mind because its main object exists. Mistaken means it's just mistaken with regard to how it appears. So a table is a table, so it's correct in perceiving a table to be a table, but the way it appears, that's where the mistake comes in. So to give you an example, the mirror image. Right? So the reflection of a mirror, it's a reflection, it exists. So when you perceive your face in a mirror, it's a reflection of a mirror. So you perceive a reflection, you perceive something that exists. But there's a mistaken appearance because it appears to be your face when it's not your face. But the reflection exists. The reflection exists as a reflection, but it mistakenly appears to be your face. So similarly here, your eye consciousness perceiving a table is a correct consciousness. It's not wrong when it comes to table. It's merely mistaken in that inherent existence appears to it, and that doesn't exist. So it has like a mistaken aspect, but it's not fully wrong. That's why our conventional minds, our ordinary minds, they're not wrong. It's not like we get everything wrong. We still perceive tables and cars. So conventional truth exists. It would be absurd to say, just because they appear to exist inherently, that the objects are not perceived. Are perceived. We know a table to be a table. Despite that mistaken appearance, we can use the reflection in a mirror that still exists. There's just a mistaken appearance. But that mistaken appearance makes it so hard for us to understand how things really exist. Again, as I said before, due to the lack of our experience. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. But it is mistaken. So even though the direct perceiver that perceives the table, for instance, the eye consciousness, is mistaken, though it's correct, but it's mistaken with regard to its appearing object, which means that it's mistaken with regard to how its main object appears as inherently existent. When conventional phenomena appear to the direct perceiver of a sentient being, that is us, they appear to exist inherently. Our body, the table, and all the other conventional truth appear in the way that does not correspond to reality. That all makes sense now, right? This means that there's a discrepancy between the way conventional truth appear to our direct perceivers and the way they actually exist. That's our difficulty. Therefore, conventional truth are not truth, but falsities. In Tibetan, you use the word, in Sanskrit, I don't even know how to pronounce this, Zumba. Right? Zumba in Tibetan, I know how to pronounce that. Psa, I don't know how to pronounce this. Therefore, conventional truth are not truth, but falsities. They're only truth from the perspective of ignorance, but they're falsities. A falsity, like we say they're false. False in that they appear one way, but exist in a different way. So they're false, right? So like an optical illusion. They're like optical illusions. Optical illusions appear one way, like a rainbow. It's also a false object. Even in ordinary worldly terms, we would say it's a false object. Yeah. For some of us, this is a false object. Not for all of us. For me, it's a false object. For me, for my mind, it appears in a way in which it doesn't exist. What is the color of the lighter parts? What do you see? Which color do you see? Do you see, raise your hand if you see blue, if you see sky blue. Is this part sky blue or is it kind of light blue, whitish? Raise your hand if it's intense blue. Intense blue. Very blue, sky blue. Is it sky blue for you? No. Oh my God, only 2 people see sky blue. Who sees this part as golden and who sees it as black? Do you see this part of sky? Is it this part here golden and this part whitish? Or is the upper part black and the lower part blue? So who sees the upper part as black and this as intense blue? Raise your hand.
Neither.
Ooh.
Neither.
I see brown.
Do you see this brown golden?
Brown.
Do you see this? Okay, raise your hand if you see brown golden and this as light blue. This is purple or any of this. Wow, this is the majority. Let's pass it around a bit. This is the famous BBC dress. I talked about the BBC dress. This was like a huge wave when that came out. It was about 10 years ago, maybe longer than that. I forget now. A while ago, I told you yesterday. Well, some of you may have not been here. So apparently there was a mother who messaged her daughter about the dress she's going to wear at her daughter's wedding. So she messaged her a photo that looked exactly like this. And then they discussed it and found out that the daughter perceived, this dress as gold, light blue. And the mother said, no, but it's black, sky blue, right? Light blue or white, some say it's white. And they were like, how's this possible? So they asked other people, and there was this exact disagreement. There were 2 different colors that were seen by different people. So in the end, it became like it went viral. It went viral in England. And it was like this, the country was divided between those seeing this and seeing that. And no one could figure it out. Anyway, it became so famous. But the thing is, why were people so astounded by this? The reason was that we believe there's an objective reality out there. So how come you don't see it? In actuality, the dress, this part that we see as brown or golden is black. And the part we see as white or as light blue, or in this here, it's even like a pinkish hue. That's because of the printer, the way it's printed out. So that is, actually it's this dark blue or this intense blue, like Calvin's shirt. It's about this color, Calvin's shirt. And you can look it up online, you can see it. But because of, there seems to be a shadow in there, our brain, half of the population, actually 57% of people see it in the right way, which is black and intense blue, just not in this group, it's not 57%. Anyway, so the point is that here it's not a majority, but our brains, the rods, apparently it's to do with the rods in our eye, the receptors, whatever it is, that therefore we don't perceive it that way. It's just more women see it in the way in which it doesn't exist. But they're here, more women of the ones who see it the way it exists, they're mainly women, which doesn't seem to support that theory. I don't know what it is, but in actuality, as I said, it's black and sky blue, which means the rest of us have a wrong consciousness. Our brain interprets to be in a shadow, and that's what it sees. I don't know, I can't explain it. There is some theories you find online. If you just Google the BBC dress, oh there you can see it. You can actually see the dress without this weird light, and you can see what it looks like. This is the photograph. There's only one photograph where this takes place, where it just happens to be such that our brain... There you go. There's the dress. What color is it? What do you see?
It's not gold, it's golden.
Well, ask Wayne. Wayne, what do you see?
It's very blue.
It's black and very blue. I don't see it.
No.
I don't see it. What is the actual? Do you have a picture of? No, that's. Do you have the actual picture? Can you Google the actual dress? Not this picture. What does the actual dress look like? If you have I don't have internet on this one. Because then, no, that's still the. We need to have a picture of the actual dress. No, it's not this. There is a picture online.
If you look at it in dimmer light, it will look black.
In a dim light, it will look really. Ah, okay, I haven't tried that. Oh yeah, Fisa, right? It's Fisa. Yeah, Fisa is another new version of the whole. You see both. She can see both. Oh, there we go. Great. You see, you've got the real dress. This is what Wayne sees, and Fisa sometimes sees. This, the darker. This is what it really looks like. That's what we don't see, right? And this is the version we see. Wayne, are they the same?
Very close. That's very blue.
That's so interesting. So Wayne sees those two as very similar. Pity, very similar, those two?
No.
No? Okay. Huh.
One is very light, one is very dark.
All right. There's even a more interesting behind where you see one, both shades.
You see gold on the right left-hand side?
I see even this side has gold. But a darker gold. Anyway, I'm sorry for that this distraction. I just wanted to point out how, first of all, our perception is not subjective, is not objective. Very important that even within the human species, if you like, the human realm, we can look at the same object and see it very differently when it comes to colors. That's a very interesting idea. But of course, there are also a lot of examples where our thoughts influence how we perceive sense objects. Our thoughts influence how we perceive sense objects. If someone tells you, for instance, this is the most disgusting food you will ever taste, you're like, you kind of care, you almost expect it. You expect it. Oh, this is the best food you ever taste. With that concept in mind, you expect some divine taste. You may be disappointed, but initially you have a sense, oh, this must be amazing. Or if someone tells you, be careful, this is really hot, you burn yourself. When you touch it, it may be totally cold, but you experience, right? You experience it as hot. In the first moment, it's like, oh no, but it's actually cold. Yeah? So how our conceptual mind actually plays a huge part in what we can perceive. There are also these optical illusions where you, for instance, see a railroad, and then two lines. They are drawn, and a line that, from the point of view of the perspective, further away, it's like 5 centimeters long, and it's got the same length as the 5 centimeters in the front. But because we see a perspective, we automatically believe the line in the back to be larger, right? To be larger, because we see this perspective, and then this line seems to be larger because it would have to be smaller. But that is only true for certain cultures. If you come from an area, maybe Tibet, like if you're a nomad, you were born in the plains of Tibet, it's very rare to see straight lines, such as straight buildings, totally squared, big roads like railroads that have to be straight. You never see this, really. You don't have the same perception. You're not raised with the same perception. And they see this later line, the line in the back, they don't have the same three-dimensional perception, and therefore see them as the same size. So you see how our thoughts, the way we make sense of the world conceptually, which leads to our perception of three-dimensional environment, which also means that certain lines have a certain size, etc. I mean, the whole thing. If you're accustomed to that, we are fooled by these optical illusions. If we're not fooled by it. So it's very interesting. There's so many examples where our conceptual mind. I mean, think about, for instance, when you grieve, when you conceptually grieve. Your conceptual mind is grieving the death of a near and dear one. Food doesn't taste the same. Your sense perception changes. The blue sky looks grayish. Versus you're newly in love. Even there's smog in Singapore. You don't have smog in Singapore, but even if you had a smoggy day in Singapore, the sky is gray. It's raining cats and dogs. It's beautiful. Right? It's like, oh, everything is beautiful. Your least favorite food tastes like nectar. Right? The whole world changes. Well, where does that come from? Is the sense perception changed? No. It's that very powerful conceptual mind. Very powerful conceptual mind that now influences. But it has to be a powerful mind for us to even notice the difference. This is how our conceptual mind is responsible for what we actually perceive. It seems to be, no, conceptual mind just registers, but it's very much responsible because of labeling, because of, I mean, all this is like, the world is wonderful. Everything is wonderful. It has an effect on how you perceive the world. Isn't that powerful? Very powerful. So we need to really reflect on that. The Buddha was totally right. Modern science completely supports this. The BBC address, everything is subjective. The fact that our thoughts influence our sense perception. Yeah. That we have a concept of something, we can perceive it. We have no concept and no idea of it, we don't even notice it. If you teach me Chinese now, and I don't realize the different, right, high-pitched and low-pitched, I probably only understand half of what you're saying. Because I don't notice the difference between these different. I have to develop a concept of it to be able to perceive that. Can you give me an example of high-pitched and low-pitched, otherwise the same sound? In Chinese? Huh?
War yesterday?
Why?
He said the war.
Why?
War.
I can't repeat that. Whoa.
War.
Whoa. Right? Whoa. Okay, I learned Tibetan. I'm a little bit aware of that. So we also have ka, and so forth. So we have that. But if I told my mother, she'd be like, you just said the same thing. Right? 3 times whoa. Like wow. Right? But we don't realize whoa. Like if you're not familiar with this concept, even if someone tells you, it takes some time until it really sinks in, and then you hear it. can't hear it beforehand. You just don't hear it. Right? I mean, even children, I'm pretty sure children don't get it right in the beginning. The parents need to tell them, no, it's war. It's not war. Or something. You need to point it out. Yeah. Just as in German, there's certain sounds you can't make automatically. You need to learn it, and your parents point it out. But of course, our brain is more malleable when we're smaller, and it's easier. It remains with us for longer. Okay. Anyway. All right, having said this, so let me see. Where did we get to? Oh, yes, so we say that conventional truths, therefore, are not truth but falsities, since they falsely or deceptively appear to exist inherently, of course, to a direct perceiver. They're merely truths from the perspective of the root ignorance, which, I mean, not just to a direct perceiver, in general, they appear to exist inherently. But emptiness can also appear to exist wrongly to a conceptual mind, but never to a direct perceiver. That's why I stressed direct perceiver. So conventional truth are merely truth from the perspective of the root ignorance, which is of course a wrong consciousness. And in all impermanent phenomena, such as sentient beings, consciousness, actions, colors, sounds, and so forth, as well as all permanent phenomena except emptiness, are conventional truth. And there you have this little drawing, and then you can read this on your own time. So truth for a concealer, because there's truth for the ignorance that perceives it. So just a summary in the form of the illustration. So sometimes it's, after all this complicated explanation, it's nice to have it summarized in the form of this illustration. So conventional truth, it's a truth for a concealer because it is a truth for the ignorance that perceives it as inherently existent and thus conceals its ultimate nature. It is a truth for the ignorance that perceives it as inherently existent. So I explain now the parts that are first concealer is the ignorance that perceives it as inherently existent. So it's a truth for that ignorance, because from the perspective of this wrong mind, it exists in the way it appears. It is not a truth, but a falsity, because from the perspective of a sentient being's direct perception, which is a correct mind, it does not exist in the way it appears. So this is the summary of why it is a truth only from the point of view of ignorance, but not a truth, instead a falsity in general. So this is why at the very beginning I said conventional truth are explained from the point of view of things ordinarily appear to us, right? Emptiness ordinarily doesn't appear to us. Ordinarily we have no idea what it is. So that explains how things really exist. Conventional truth, just how they ordinarily appear to us. Although in the context of the terms samvritti satya or kunsukdempa or conventional truth, the words samvritti and kunsuk mean to conceal, Chandrakirti says in his clear words that the term in general has three meanings: concealer or relative or independent worldly conventions. This is where we use conventional. It's not wrong, although in this context it literally means truth for that which obscures. We have permission by Chandrakirti himself to say conventional truth, because it actually also has that meaning. So in English we're not totally wrong. We're not using a literal translation, but we're still using a translation that is not incorrect in either Sanskrit or Tibetan. Great, we're really going to finish the text. 28. Yes. I did race a little bit. Well, let's see. Still 20 pages to go. Don't clap too early. Okay, great. Now again, as we always do, we have some time for questions. I understand many of you probably have to get up early, have a long time to get home. So please feel free to leave, get up and leave. But for the rest, as long as there are some questions, I'm happy to try and answer your questions. Ah, your homework. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, great. Great. What is your homework? Okay, very good. Homework.
Conventional truth.
Conventional truth. Really meditate on conventional truth. In what way is it a conventional truth? Reflect on different objects, yourself and others. Does it exist or not? Is it a truth or not? In what way is an ultimate truth a truth? Is it a truth or not? So really, this is not very complicated, but to just run it through your mind again, to fully understand, right? This is why we call it a conventional truth. That's why the two truths are important in terms of ordinary appearance and actual existence. So to deepen your understanding of what we've gone through, the best is to just run it past again. And only then you may have certain questions that you previously didn't have. So basically what we went through, those 4 pages, if you're interested, if you have the time, if you can make the time, maybe reread it or use your own memory of what we said and run it past through again. Analyze it, and see whether you really fully understand that original statement. Conventional truth are explained from the point of view of of how phenomena ordinarily appear to us. Ultimate truth are explained from the point of view of how they actually exist. And in that way you get a better understanding of the true truth and possibly have some questions pop up. Great. That's your homework. Please, let's start the questions, and if you need to go, please do. There's a question right in the back, yeah.
Sorry.
Cecilia. Oh, yes, Cecilia.
Can I go back to the discussion on dependent arising?
Yes.
The 3 levels.
Yes.
Causes and conditions, parts and merely labeled.
Yes.
Can those 3 different classifications apply to one single phenomenon?
Okay.
Do they apply to one single phenomenon?
All right. Very good question. So let me ask all of you. Let's take one example. Our favorite subject, me. Your subject, me. No, I'm joking. But the I. Let's take the I. All right. Let's analyze it together. Does your I, your personal I, I'm not saying mine, but your personal I, does it depend on causes and conditions? Yes. Okay. So the I consists of body and mind. It depends on causes and conditions that cause the body, right? You're all aware of what those are. And there are causes and conditions that cause the mind. Okay, so number 1, tick. Number 2, do you consist of parts that are not you?
Yes.
Yes. What do you consist of that is not the I? The 5 aggregates, mind, body, the different body parts, the different consciousnesses. So number 2 is given. Now let's see the last one. Is the I labeled by conceptual consciousness on independence on a valid basis of imputation, a conceptual consciousness or thought, and lastly, a label? I.
Yes.
So, in answer to your question, Cecilia, yeah. You see how lovely you can actually answer your own question. I didn't answer it, you answered it. All right?
I just wanted to confirm.
Yeah.
And then my second question is the use of this term that you've been using, self-centered.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to clarify because the terms we are more familiar with is, and we break it into 2, self-cherishing, which is I'm the center of the universe,
yes,
and self-grasping, which is this grasping at the inherently existent I.
Yes.
So it sounds like from your presentation, these 2 elements have been combined into one term, self-centered. Because the way you explain it, it goes from, I'm the most important person, and then, this sense of this inherent existent I. So it looks like the 2 is combined, and you use the term self-centered for that.
Okay. maybe I shouldn't use the term self-centeredness, though it's actually two words, but it's linked with a hyphen. I think, but self-cherishing, maybe you have to link it with a hyphen, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, self-cherishing, okay, so, you know, why could I be using, okay, let's see, why do you think I don't like to use the word self-cherishing? What could be the reason why I don't want to use it? Think of the other mind, that is its kind of counterpart that we try to develop.
Cherishing as a
So, what has changed? Instead of saying, yeah, other cherishing sounds a little awkward, but that's really what it is. What has changed when we say self-cherishing and other cherishing? What is the difference between the two? Not the word cherishing, right? That's remained the same. So I have a bit of an issue with that because it seems cherishing is the same. But one is an extreme cherishing, whereas the other is a positive one. But in Tibetan, of course, you're right. Rang Chinsin, Shen Chinsin. It's the same word, Chinsin. To see as precious, or to perceive as precious, basically, or as valuable, if you like. So actually in Tibetan, one is negative and one is positive. Now, yeah, I started to get into the habit of saying self-centeredness just to be sure that it's not misunderstood. But to be closer to the Tibetan, self-cherishing is the right term. Also self-grasping. Self-grasping in Tibetan, the word is literally apprehend. For instance, when we say an eye consciousness, apprehending or perceiving a table, that is the same word, it's zin in Tibetan, as when we say holding on to inherent existence. It's also zin. So in English, we translate it as grasping to emphasize this strong, wrong view. So when in Tibetan, we don't use a different word. It's dan zin. Da means I. Zin means is hold, apprehend. When you perceive a table, it's a vase. It's bumba zimba. Bumba zimba mikshe. Again, you have the word zin. There's no exaggerated. There's no emphasis on the zin. There's no different word. But it's still good to use grasping. Yeah. So yeah, self-grasping is a good term. And then you can choose to say self-centeredness or self-cherishing. It doesn't make much of a difference. It's really, I'm so used to it. But I want to explain to you why I use it. Especially in German. In German, it's even harder because the word for cherishing has a very positive connotation. It's like cherishing the value. It has that connotation, wertschätzen in German, which has the wert means value, schätzen means appreciate the value. So when you say, I appreciate my own value as something negative, people go, that's a good thing.
Yes.
Right? Appreciate your own value. So I got into the habit to use the equivalent to self-centeredness in German. And I guess I just took it over without thinking about it. Yeah. But Cecilia is making a good point. If somehow you feel like, oh, there's a difference between self-cherishing and self-centeredness, no. That's just me translating from German to English.
Thank you.
All right. Good point. Anyone else? No more questions? Yep. Oops, sorry. Okay. All right. I guess we're done with the questions. All right. So all that's left is to do the dedication. And again, let's take a last bit of energy left to focus on the dedication. So to think, may whatever positive potential we've accumulated by learning about the true truth today, may that become a cause for all of us to not only conceptually but directly with a meditative equipoise understand in particular the ultimate truth, so that we can gradually eliminate all the obstructions in order to attain the fully purified mind of a Buddha. for the welfare of each and every sentient being. So with this in mind, let's recite the dedication prayer. Janju Semjo Rinpoche, Make Panam Kengyoji, Kema Nyapa Mepaya, Kone Moklu Pewa Shu.